You have the name of their next target.
The name is Neo.
With a brand new Matrix movie in production, you've probably been looking for a reason to rewatch. As if you even need a reason. The Bingers got the perfect reasons though, and it'll surely have you seeing things in a brand new light. All these details you're about to see will prove filmmaking is about creativity and problem solving.
Our way or the highway?
You're about to find a newfound respect for this series. We just hope you're ready for it because it's all starting right now.
As you can see, we've had our eye on you for some time now, Mr. Anderson.
Everyone and their grandmother knows about the Matrix code that rains down across a black screen. Those green digital droplets are more than iconic at this point. However, many fans missed the extra code snuck into the Matrix Revolution. Specifically, we're referring to that climactic battle between Agent Smith and Neo. You remember the fight, right? It's the one your college roommate said makes the entire trilogy redeemable, man, and that you had to watch The Matrix for that moment alone. Wait, was that not everyone's first experience with that scene? Well, alright then. The point still stands. While most viewers were caught up in the super-powered kung fu, the secret detail lay dormant all these years later. Turns out the rainfall is more than water. There's also specks of teensy-tiny code falling just like the iconic green lines. You can already notice them at first, but look closely at the scene. Every once in a while, you'll see one flash by in an instant. See, we're not kidding. Some of these entries are real blink and you'll miss it kind of moments, and there's even more coming. Okay, it's really starting to feel like Keanu Reeves can do really nothing wrong at this point. He's the kind of celebrity we all assume must be incredibly down to earth. So down to earth, in fact, that he might actually be out of this world. This is precisely why we wanted to take an entry to give him major props for this particular moment in The Matrix. You already know that 44 of his first 80 lines are questions.
Were you not sure if you were awake or still dreaming?
All the time.
But there's more to the Thomas Anderson scenes you might have missed. We're talking specifically about his first chance at awakening while he's at work. Morpheus tells him that the only way to escape the agents is to climb out the window and scale his way around the building. This incredible moment of tension follows where he slowly makes his way around the building to escape. You might be thinking, wow, this is incredible! We can see all of Keanu Reeves' facial reactions right here. Well, it was actually Keanu walking on that ledge. Of course, safety precautions were instated, but that doesn't mean it wasn't completely terrifying.
I can't do this.
People tend to forget how big of a cultural event the Matrix Trilogy was. Fans from countries in every corner of the globe would line up for midnight releases. Oh, and by the way, the Matrix Revolutions came back in 2003. That was a time when midnight for theater premieres. There was none of this 10 o'clock to midnight stuff you see now. Then again, The Matrix Revolutions theatrical release was something else entirely. The film's first showing in theaters across the globe occurred at precisely the same time. Okay, that might be confusing to some people watching, so let's clarify. We don't mean London, New York, and LA all got the same midnight release time. We're saying that the first show at theaters in LA occurred at exactly the same time in London despite the time difference. Everywhere the film was shown coordinated this global viewing party. The Matrix fans all watched the same movie at the same time worldwide, then shared their thoughts on their internet forums of old. Yeah, there were probably a lot of arguments as well, but talk about a special moment.
Unbelievable. Isn't it?
Did you ever wonder what city The Matrix is meant to be located in? It's likely the film is intended to take place in virtual Chicago, since that's the hometown of the Wachowski siblings. Despite Chicago being the intended destination, none of the films were ever shot there. In case you weren't aware, it's super expensive to shoot in that city. The first film only had a $60 million budget, which sounds like a lot, but it's not in the entertainment industry, especially when you're trying to film the next great summer blockbuster. To help with their budget issues, the Wachowskis decided to film in Australia. They shot in Fox's studio and on-site in Sydney, Australia for The Matrix. It wasn't until the budget increased that they moved the next two films to California.
Got the money?
$2,000.
But wait, there's more. The sets built for the last two movies took a lot of lumber and concrete to create. And instead of throwing it all in the dump afterwards, the production company recycled the material to build homes in Mexico. There, the sets live out the rest of their Matrixy days. It felt like Neo went through years of trouble to get to the end of his quest. From the time he wakes up to the moment he's carried off by the machines in the final scenes, a lot of time passes by. How much never really felt clear to the viewer. After all, it wasn't like any of the people in Zion were announcing the time every hour.
Just in time. You're gonna see the Oracle, aren't you?
We don't have time.
Everyone was way too busy surviving to pay attention to something trivial like that. That being said, there is an actual answer to this question, which just so happens to be the name of this entry. It took 19 months for the Chosen One program to run its course. We're not sure if that's efficient programming or the worst example of coding we've ever seen. We're not actually all computer science majors here over at the Binger. You're probably wondering how we know this exactly. Well, the phone tray sequence in the opening and closing of the trilogy gives us exact dates. The first call was received on 19th, 1998, and the last one was received on September 19th, 1999, exactly 19 months apart. Okay, so we already mentioned that the first film was shot around Australia. Still, for the final two films, the crew went stateside to film around the Bay Area. Many of the city shots are from Oakland, California, but you wouldn't know that by first glance. Even for locals in the area, things don't look like you'd expect them to. Turns out the architect and the Oracle weren't huge fans of traffic control and colorful signs in their cities. To show this, the film sent out a team of people to paint over the blue or red curbs. Oakland officials were okay with this temporary change, and it honestly helped both films' vision. We can't even imagine either movie with that look in The Matrix. Those colors feel too closely aligned with the Sentinels. However, we can't help imagining the poor assistants who had to go out and paint all those curbs. Those curbs probably stayed that way for a week or two tops. Then those same assistants would have to paint them over again. But hey, Oakland got some free traffic work done, so that's a plus. The 90s were a different time. The internet was still a fresh concept that hadn't been jam-packed with all the memes we could muster.
Is the world that you know.
The Wachowskis had a Herculean chore in front of them. They wanted to tell a story using computer science's language about living in a false reality. Communicating this to an audience that was just getting the hang of Microsoft Office was going to be a challenge. Part of explaining the simulation was the use of a black cat that illustrated déjà vu.
Deja vu.
For the runners, this helped indicate danger was near. The program was being looped. It's one of the aha moments in that first film that you pointed out when your grandmother was still confused by the whole plot. Turns out it's not the last time you see that exact same cat. The final scene of the final movie gives the deja vu kitty a send-off. He walks down the sidewalk and gives out one last meow before floating back into cyberspace. Oh yeah, speaking of callbacks, here's another one for you. We're back in that final fight between Agent Smith and Neo. Only this time it happens right as the two fighters crash back into the crater during their epic fight. Almost out of sight in the frame is a phone booth. The one you see there is meant to be the exact same phone booth Neo makes the call from in the first film. That call gave us so much hope. Neo has accepted his role and vows to end the tyranny of the agents and machines. He speaks directly to humanity's overlords as they attempt to trace this call.
I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see.
So his plan basically works out in the end. At the very least, there should be no need for the Chosen One program anymore. The phone booth in that fight scene is there to remind us of that promise and how he's making it come true over a year later. Before the digital age of cameras, there was film. Matrix was shot on several Panavision cameras, all using 35mm film. This meant to alter the film's color palette, you had to use color timing. It's a more challenging process than merely developing the film and adding hours onto the post-production schedule. But why are we telling you all of this? Well, it helps add weight to what we're about to explain. See, The Matrix has an incredibly specific color palette. Anytime the characters are in the simulated world, everything is given a green tint, as if the code is bleeding out of the edges. The one exception is the training scene in the first film, but even that has an unnatural grading to it. All the locations outside the simulation are given a close to natural look. Of course, with digital filming came the rise of color grading. The next two Matrix films rode that wave, and viewers saw a lot more variety in those films. Also, the green tended to be more pronounced in the simulated world. Still, you often don't notice it until it's pointed out. In our last video, we touched on some essential biblical and mythical references that appear in this film. There was even some mention of the character's ship being named after King Nebuchadnezzar, a well-known ancient ruler. He ruled over Babylon during the late 1600s to early 500s BC. His most outstanding achievement was the building of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Yes, the king that Morpheus and the crew named their ship after is apparently the builder of one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. There's also an important reason the writers used this Old Testament ruler. Daniel 2, verse 1 through 49 speaks about Nebuchadnezzar's dream and the adventure to interpret it. It's the same thing this crew of the ship is doing by entering the Matrix. They're openly discovering the real meaning behind the dream state they were all put in so long ago. You see, it all comes back to the religious overtures and mythical connections throughout these movies. The more you understand them, the more depth the story holds. So next time you're watching with friends, drop that fun history factoid on them. Ask any dungeon master how hard it is to build an entire world, and they'll tell you it's a never-ending project. The greatest creators of all time toiled away building out fantasy realms that they wanted people to believe in. It's one of the greatest struggles writers can go through before they begin to craft their stories. Trust us, the Wachowski siblings had just as much trouble building the world of The Matrix as any other artist. The Matrix was a passion project they felt called to make, but getting it off the ground took time and money. We're going to explain the money aspect here in a second, but let's explain what they were doing in the meantime. For starters, it took the two of them 5.5 years to finalize the first film. Over those many years, the screenplay went through 14 rewrites. Then, once it was funded and sent into pre-production, it took approximately 500 storyboard attempts to get the movie's look and feel correct.
We're in.
Obviously, the two siblings cared a great deal about the details. We stick to our word around here at The Binger. When we say an entry is up next, you can be sure it's going to be up next. Unless, of course, the editor decides to switch things around, but we don't see that happening in this case. At least while writing it. Anyways, this entry is about how the siblings were able to secure financial backing for The Matrix. It didn't seem possible when their first screenwriting credit went to the commercial and critical flop Assassins. However, most of their original script was rewritten. They needed to get on the good side of the producers at Warner Brothers, so the two started working on their directorial debut, Bound. For those unaware, Bound was a modest $7 million production that wasn't a massive release. However, the critics gave the film glowing reviews, and that was enough hype for the Wachowskis to pitch their next project. It feels weird to point that out. Without Bound, there is no Matrix. No one would have guessed back in 1996 that those two directors would create one of the most game-changing films of all time. One last callback to our list as we wrap things up.
How much further? Here, just here.
This time we wanted to focus on another music detail from the films. Our previous video talked about the key changes in the score across these movies, which was pretty interesting. Obviously, the films went up a key every movie to associate the story with a climactic battle. We feel that that one was a given. This Easter egg, though, is a bit more in-depth. When Neo first meets the Oracle, the jazz song "I'm Beginning to See the Light" plays softly in the background.
Not quite what you were expecting, right?
Okay, we all know what it symbolizes, right? Neo is starting to realize his purpose and discover his true place in the Matrix, hence the song playing for that moment. However, the song comes back again when Neo goes to see the Oracle in Matrix Revolutions, only this time it's a more recent version.
Do you recognize me?
A part of you.
What does this tell us about Neo? Well, that as he begins to follow his path, more and more truths are revealed to him. After all that, he's still just beginning to see everything in a proper perspective. We've brought up such fantastic moments from these films, and we'd be remiss if we didn't discuss one more fantastic action scene. Can you guess it? Yes, of course, it's the lobby scene from the first movie. Everybody loves the lobby scene. Your dog loves the lobby scene. Your neighbor looks through the window to watch that scene whenever you have it on. You know, everybody. They all just know it's iconic. So let's get into those hidden details. For starters, the scenery was improvised. They decided on a whim where to shoot that fight, and turned out they picked very well. After they chose, it was a quick turnaround to get the scene coordinated. Keep in mind, there's no CGI in that scene. It took 10 days to shoot with only practical effects, which is inconceivable to some modern-day filmmakers. To top it all off, one last moment of inspiration occurred out of thin air. As the camera was panning back to its ready spot, a block of concrete broke off a pillar with a thud. It was just too perfect, and the moment was kept in the final cut. You can't make that stuff up. Remember how Ed gives us the entire plot of the movie during the first act at the pub in Shaun of the Dead? Well, it turns out The Matrix was into massive spoilers as well. However, their foreshadowing was hidden in a cutaway scene, while that was actual film dialogue. Sorry, you're probably wondering what the heck we're talking about. Allow us to explain. See, Thomas Anderson is a programmer for a software development company named Meta Cortex. The name sounds like a bunch of science terms thrown at a whiteboard, but take a closer look. Meta means go beyond or transcend, and the cortex is the boundary of gray matter in your brain. So metacortex is loosely referring to the idea of transcending the brain's outer limits. Man, we feel like Amy Adams in Arrival after that train of thought. Neo's whole purpose in the Matrix is to transcend his reality. He breaks the barriers his gray matter put in place to escape the simulation. It was all there in front of us right from the start. How about that? Was that enough Matrix content for you? Well, if you're still craving, there is still plenty more here at The Binger. Simply like and subscribe to our channel and leave your thoughts in the comments down below. We release new videos daily, so there's always more chances to plug into The Matrix with us soon.